I'm so happy to welcome back our first ever podcast guest. This person actually came on and was our first guest ever. So thank you for coming back. At the time we last met, it was February 2024. We were still trying to come to grips with what we were seeing in Gaza. And at the time, we had talked about the challenges that mothers and children faced in Gaza and the impact it was having on our mental health. Now we're meeting again more than a year later, and the conditions on the ground just haven't improved. We've had a brief pause earlier in 2025, but things just seem to be intensifying again, and it seems like we're heading in the wrong direction. I've seen a few different reactions to this. There's those people that have kind of fallen into a bit of a depressive state, or you can classify it as hopelessness. Some who have just become numb to it all and a feeling of like helplessness. And there's others who are trying to do something, but they may feel like they've tried everything and nothing's really working. So joining me today to talk about this topic is Runda Ebied. Welcome back. Runda is a mother and a pediatric occupational therapist. She's in the process of becoming a psychotherapist, and she's passionate about maternal and children's mental health and has a platform dedicated to these topics, as well as others, on how to cope and process difficult emotions while we witness the events in our world today, as well as raising children who are stand for social justice. So Runda, I'll start by asking you the same question I asked you last time. How are you feeling?
So I think over the last year and a half, there's been kind of a cocktail of emotions that I've personally been experiencing. I know many others have as well, in terms of not just what's happening in Gaza and the genocide that, like you said, doesn't seem to be getting any better, but actually seems to be getting worse. And then the pleasantly surprising relief and joy that we felt with our Syrian brothers and sisters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So half my family's in Syria and half of them are in Palestine. So getting to experience and witness the grief and the sadness and the oppression and the injustice of my family members in Gaza, and then experiencing the relief and joy of my family members in Syria has just been a really, really interesting and humbling experience. So I think we've all kind of been feeling those range of human emotions almost on a daily basis, even from grief to sadness to frustration to anger, betrayal, and everything in between. And the way I explain it is that we're all having a very normal response to a very abnormal situation.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to sit with myself the other day and just be really honest. Am I feeling any less distressed by what I'm seeing online in terms of the videos and images that are coming out of Gaza? Am I feeling any less distressed than I was in October of 2023? And I think it was a question that I really had to sit and think really long and hard about, because if we are feeling any less distressed, and I brought myself to account, then that's something we need to check and kind of realize what's going on inside of us. And we'll talk about that today,
Mm-hmm.
how witnessing all of this destruction, how that can take a toll on us psychologically. And I think one of the emotions that I've personally experienced the most, and I know many others, is this emotion named qahr. And there really isn't an English equivalent to it. And I was trying to figure out a way to define it in English. And I actually found a definition that someone wrote. Her name is Khadija Dajani. Is it okay if I read it?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think it explains it really well. So there is no English equivalent to the Arabic word qahr. The dictionary says anger, but it's not. It is when you take anger, place it on a low fire, add injustice, oppression, racism, and dehumanization to it, and leave it to cook slowly for a century. And then you try to say it, but no one hears you. So it sits in your heart and settles in your cells, and it becomes your genetic imprint. And then it moves through generations. And one day you find yourself unable to breathe. It washes over you and demands to break out of you. You weep, and the cycle repeats. So I think that's kind of been one of the main emotions, where it's kind of like a mixing pot of so much that we've been experiencing in terms of the oppression and discrimination and dehumanization. And it settles inside of us, and it's so hard for it to be processed properly.
Right. And one of the things I love about that is when you talk about like a low simmer.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Because it's like it's just under the surface.
Yeah.
And if you don't address it, or if you don't look for it, you won't see it. Like you can
Yeah.
talk to a lot of people that have experienced injustice
Mhm.
for a very long period of time, and they'll be like joyful and they'll be happy, and
Yeah.
but there's always that underlying feeling of qahr. I love that. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
love the word, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
perfect word for describing what it is you're feeling, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
That dichotomy that you're talking about with the Syrian and Palestinian sides of family, I felt that so much when we went to Lebanon and we went to the refugee camps in Syria. Or sorry, we went to the refugee camps where the Syrians were staying,
Mm.
and we were singing with the kids and playing with the kids and stuff. And the number one like song that's being sung right now is like "Irfa rasak fo inta Suri hor,"
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
raise your head
Yeah.
high, like you're
Yeah.
a free Syrian, right?
Mhm.
And I remember being there and just being so happy for them that
Yeah.
they're experiencing that, and at the same exact time having the feeling of like, when is that going to happen for us?
Yeah.
You know, and that dichotomy that you're experiencing was like, I felt that so much while we were over there in Lebanon.
Yeah, and especially with what's happened in Syria, and that's so beautiful that people were able to find and cultivate that joy despite living in refugee camps. Like just to look at the amount of oppression and injustice that our brothers and sisters everywhere have experienced, and then with even what happened in Syria, there was that relief, but there was also so much grief that followed when the stories of people came out,
Right.
the people who were released from prison. And like honestly, they were harrowing stories when you really listen to what they had gone through. So even that relief and joy was intertwined with so much grief and sadness as well, and anger. So subhanallah,
In a way,
everywhere.
like the grief started then,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly.
Because now that it's like remember if we talked about back in February 2024, we talked about how in Gaza there's no post-traumatic stress disorder,
Right.
right? Because it's never post; it's just continuously
Yeah.
being the trauma is coming up again and again.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a way, for them, for people who experience what happened in Syria, it's like they finally had a chance to start that post
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
As crazy as it sounds, and they're finally able to start grieving.
Right. Yeah.
And that's going to be a very long road
A very
of recovery, right?
Yeah, very long term when you look at the trauma and how trauma gets processed and stored, and for an entire society, right, an entire generation that now has to rebuild and figure out how to reintegrate back into society after living, some of them for decades, underground. Like that's, whenever I think about that, it's just the amount of trauma that they've experienced. And like you said, people I think are, like when I talk to my family in Syria, they're still in a bit of shock. Like they're still at the like, wait, did this actually happen kind of stage, and so am I. And just that potential of being able to go and visit is something that wasn't even on the radar for a long time. So alhamdulillah, it was definitely a lot of joy, but mixed up with a lot of other emotions too.
And our emotions are both individual and collective. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about collectively how we're feeling, and maybe in relation specifically to Gaza. Do you think we've reached a point where we've collectively are emotionally numb or desensitized?
Yeah, so I've been talking to a lot of people about this lately because, so when you look at our brain's function, our brain's primary function is our survival. So when someone's been experiencing or consuming or exposed to a lot of pain and suffering, whether it's firsthand or secondary, right? We talked about that secondary trauma last time. The brain has to find a way to cope, to enable this person to cope and continue to function in their life. So what happens is the brain, through a very, subhanAllah, a brilliant design for us to be able to weather the storms of life, it dials down the volume on how much we actually experience emotions. So it basically said, the brain kind of goes through this process of, okay, there's so much pain here that I need to limit how much pain is entering your psyche and your system. So it's kind of that emotional valve shuts off for a bit. Now, the problem with that is that you can't just shut off the valve for the emotions you don't want to feel, like grief and sadness. It shuts off all the other, like, more pleasant emotions, like joy and excitement and fulfillment, connection. So what happens is we become numb to any kind of emotional sensation or expression, which really limits our ability to live in a very full way. And it not only disconnects us from our emotions, it disconnects us from each other and from the cause and the causes that we're trying to advocate for. The other kind of downfall of this is the more emotionally disconnected you are, the harder it is to connect spiritually to the Quran, to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even when you're praying, you're kind of just going through the motions. So we enter this state of autopilot where you're just going through your life and you're not connected. Like people start to feel flat, right? So people come and tell me, I don't feel anything. I watch the news and it doesn't impact me anymore. And that's when we know we've reached that state of emotional numbing. It's not your fault. I tell them it's an adaptive mechanism, a protective mechanism that the brain has to do so that we can continue to survive. So a lot of us may have reached that state. And again, it could be because of just the intensity and the volume of suffering that we're witnessing and exposing our brains to, that the brain has to shut it off for a bit. That, okay, you can keep watching this, but you're not going to be feeling as much anymore.
It's that sensitivity, right, of how low, like the lows and the highs are there. Like the reason I feel like collectively, and I understand what you're saying, because this Eid, the khutbahs before, like in Jum'ah before Eid, at least the one here at Wellness, was about how you have to feel joy on Eid. Like it's crazy that we've gotten to the point where we're telling people, no, you have to be happy on Eid. You're commanded to be happy on Eid. And that just shows you how people are feeling like they're not able to get those highs of emotions because, like you said, the lower end is also being limited. Exactly. And I've experienced this even with stuff like with my own family and like talking to my parents and stuff where they're just like, it's difficult to get them excited about things anymore. But like if we're going to do like a trip together or we're going to like a restaurant together or something, like it's difficult to get them to be happy about that.
Right.
But maybe it is like you're saying, it's because the low end is also being limited on our emotional scale, that we're sort of stuck in this middle because that's the safest place to be.
Yeah. The whole range of our emotional capacity and our emotional expression gets reduced, right? That whole window of being able to experience emotions, and that's part of our humanity, that we will experience the hard emotions, but also the really nice emotions too. And the more we realize that we've become into this numb state, the more we can actually overcome it. And I know we're going to chat about that, about how to snap out of that state. I personally went through it at one point. I don't know if you remember, you probably do. Earlier on in the genocide, I think a couple of weeks in the Al Ahli hospital when it got bombed and over 500 people were killed. I remember that day specifically, and I think it was probably the worst day in this whole thing for me personally in terms of how I responded emotionally. And I'll never forget that day. I was just in a really, really bad emotional state. I was very emotional. My kids could tell. And I went to visit my parents that day, and I started watching the news through my dad's eyes, because he grew up there in Gaza and he has an emotional connection to all of these places that have been bombed and so many of the people that he grew up with and loves, and he just doesn't know if they're even alive anymore. So I was watching the news through his eyes, and he was telling me how his mother, my grandma, Allah yarhamha, used to take him to that place around Al Ahli hospital to play. And now seeing it in the aftermath of that destruction was just so painful for him. And I absorbed that pain. And it was such a difficult day emotionally that for the rest of that week, I was a bit checked out because of the amount of pain that I was feeling. And it gets to you at a cellular level almost, where your brain has to dial down. And then I eventually realized that's what was happening to me. And I had to overcome that numbness to be able to actually connect with what I was doing every day and my emotions and the news and what was happening. So we've all probably gone in and out of these states at some point over the last year and a half. It's hard to stay fully engaged if you're consuming a lot of this news every day. So we can talk about that balance in a bit, but I think it's important for us. The first step is just to know that you are in that disconnected state.
And there's a specific term that I think I'd love for you to be able to define and explain is moral injury.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So moral injury is when you're seeing pain and suffering being inflicted on an individual and feeling helpless to stop it. Like it feels wrong. Like deep down, you're like, this feels so wrong, and you don't know how to stop it. That results in so much internal, like that feeling of unsettledness, like that this happened to this person. It could happen to me. It could happen to anyone that I love, and no one is seemingly to do anything about it. And I always remember there's a story about a person who used to stand outside the White House in Washington during the Vietnam War. And he used to just stand outside every day with a candle protesting what was happening. And a reporter came to him and said, do you actually think that you protesting out here is going to change anything? And he said, oh, I don't stand out here to change them. I stand out here so they don't change me,
Right.
because I want to preserve my integrity, my humanity, my moral compass. And that's what we all need to do, because this can change us at a very fundamental level when we see all these things. That moral injury can take its toll, where we stop feeling as disgusted by what's happening. And it just becomes something routine for us.
Mm-hmm. And like that's an internal change. I'm just wondering, like, what kind of messages are we internalizing when we're watching what's happening, and we don't see anybody held accountable for it?
Yeah, and that's very psychologically damaging too, right? And that's where just being aware of what these messages are, and I'll name a few of them, can be so powerful. It kind of helps us reclaim our power over the narrative that's being kind of fed to us. So I think one of the main messages is, especially after the ceasefire, because the ceasefire gave a bit of hope, a little bit of relief. And then when it got broken so viciously, it sends a message of, like, do we continue to have hope? Like, is this something that we continue to cultivate in each other? Because hope is a very dangerous thing for the colonizer, right? When people start to have hope equals energy.
Right.
Energy and momentum, and you don't give up, and you keep going, and you come together in solidarity. So when the ceasefire was broken, that sent a very loud message to people, right? Morale gets crushed. Some of the other messages are that exactly what you said. There's no accountability. There's nobody stopping this. So it kind of starts to send the message of only certain lives matter, and no one's coming to save you, right? And that's a very crushing message that we get. Some of the other ones are, that this situation will outlast your outrage, right? Just give it long enough. These type of things get prolonged because, they think that people will get bored and tired, and they'll just stop trying to do anything about it. So, and some of the other messages are just around, like, how this just becomes something normal. Get used to it, right? We're going to do so much destruction that you're watching it all day. It's going to wear you down. It's going to burn you out. Nothing's going to be done to stop it. And this just becomes something that becomes so normalized. So these are the messages that come our way, and we have to actively oppose them and realize that this is what's being sent to us from everything that's happening. Even our empathy and our compassion, right, gets kind of weaponized against us, that there's so much going on that you feel the need to watch it all, which results in burnout and the disconnection that we just talked about, which makes people less likely to even advocate anymore because they're so tired. So all of this comes together and makes this kind of phenomenon where not only are the people inside being oppressed, but it's out of the playbook, right? Just try to weaken everybody on the outside too, so that no one has the energy to keep advocating.
Right. And we're seeing that a lot now. Like right now, we're in the middle of an election campaign.
Right.
And honestly, some of the most common thing that you hear from people when you're talking to them about, we need to vote and we need to get out and, advocate for this person or that person, is people saying, well, what's the point?
Right.
They're all the same. Nothing has changed. You've tried this group, you've tried that group, and they're all the same. And so that emotion is manifesting itself and showing right now during the election cycle. And there are people trying to actively push against that.
Yeah.
But we need more people to do that.
For sure. That's exactly what it is. And that's where the more we can come out of this emotional numbed state and realize and just be aware, like a lot of it just comes down to a lot of self-awareness. What have I internalized? What have I come to believe over the last year and a half that's impacting my ability to not only function in my life or how I regard myself or my fellow brothers and sisters, but my role, like my part of the puzzle. It might seem like it's not going to do anything now, but if all of us said that, then obviously nothing will ever change, right? And any movement in history, and I think that's where we really need to learn more about our history and learn about how these things actually happen. It's people that know that they might not actually see the results in any time in their lifetime. It might not be 20 or 30 years from now. And we have to plant the seeds. We have to keep going to make this, to fulfill our objective here, right? What is our purpose? It's continuing to reorient ourselves to why we're here. So these little steps that we take may seem very little to us, but in the grand scheme of things, that's what adds up to change eventually.
And one of the things I think it kind of changed my life a little bit and my perspective is a few years back, I read a ton of autobiographies. And so I read autobiographies of people that I admired. I read like Nelson Mandela's autobiography. It's like 700 pages or something. It's like an encyclopedia. It's like, but I read it because I was so interested in the sort of South African model of fighting apartheid. And I was thinking about, so, and what happens, I think, when you read a lot of autobiographies, and autobiographies are just like basically people writing about their own experiences and their own lives, as opposed to a biography where somebody writes it about somebody else, is you realize that they're just ordinary people who consistently have principle and just continue pushing along the way for whatever it is that they're trying to do. And it gives you a little bit of that hope that, you know, you can't sit around and wait for somebody extraordinary to come along and do something. Like, you are that person. You have to just realize that. You know what I mean? And like, and that's exactly what the people who are oppressing you don't want you to realize, is that you have that extraordinary potential within you. And that feeling of helplessness is exactly what they want you to be in, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we're playing right into it, right? And exactly that. There's no one else coming. Like, if we don't try to save ourselves, there's no one else that's going to come and say, "Hey, let me lift oppression off of you." No, it has to come from within.
There's a question that I wanted to ask you, and maybe it's a question you can ask yourself, right? Is, as you were going through that reflective time and asking yourself, am I adding to the healing or am I adding to the pain of the ummah? Why do you think that's an important question to ask?
I think it's really important because just like the Prophet ﷺ saying that the ummah is like one body, right? When one part is suffering, the rest of it feels that fever. So I always ask myself, am I adding to the fever? Am I adding to the pain? Or am I strengthening the immune system? Because we're always falling into one of those things, right? Am I adding to the pain, which involves me kind of not doing my part, right? And we each have a part to play, no matter how small, and it's going to look different for each of us, right? The things that I do are going to be very different than what you do. We all have different skills and different capacities, but that's the question that we need to ask. How am I contributing to this whole story? And doing nothing isn't an option, right? Because that's kind of adding to the pain, right? So something that I like to ask myself from time to time is, am I adding to the healing? And that involves a lot of things, right? Adding to the pain is also adding to the division. Are we dividing each other? Are we spending time on useless, meaningless things that are just taking away from our ability to do what we actually need to do? Am I helping us stay focused and organized and contributing to the healing, no matter how small? Even just checking in on someone, helping someone out, a listening ear, a warm shoulder for someone to cry on, whatever it is. Just, we each have a part to play in this entire kind of puzzle. We're each a part of that puzzle. And like the Prophet ﷺ said, like a Muslim to a Muslim is like a building, like bricks that make up a building, right? If one of the bricks isn't there, the building is a lot shakier. So that's something that I just like to reflect on from time to time.
And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize, or maybe don't think about too much, is that doing nothing is a choice. It's an active choice. And you may not intend it to be that way because you haven't thought about it. But when you're actively choosing to do nothing, then you're leaving space for other people to do something. And specifically the people who are trying to oppress you. This is not a situation necessarily where, if everybody stopped doing things today, that we would stay at the same point. Like, we are actively pushing back against oppression. If we take a break, right? And we'll talk about what a break means. I'm not talking about like take a day off or an afternoon off so you can recharge. But if collectively we all decide, you know what, this is just too much, I can't do it, I can't do anything anymore, we're not going to pick back up a week later where we were, right? We're going to take it years back from where we are. And so if you think about it of like people kind of holding back this giant thing that's rolling. It's
a good analogy.
Right? We're all pushing back against this thing. It's going to roll back if we stop pushing. And that's scary, right? Because we do need those breaks sometimes, and we do need sometimes to like recharge, and but we can't all do that.
Well, that's
we can't do it at the same time.
We have to take turns, right? Being on the front lines, and that's the thing. We each have to figure out, what is my contribution to this, right? And that's where we have to be hyper aware of where we are from a mental and emotional state, and basically, as we're watching and consuming and being informed and staying informed, it's I might not be able to do anything right now, right in this moment, to channel my emotions in a healthy way. But at least it's making kind of that pact with yourself that when an opportunity presents itself for me to be involved and engaged, and we're told about kind of how to advocate in a meaningful manner, that I'll be there, that I'll show up, that I'll do what I have to do. And that's really how we keep the ball rolling. Like you said, if we take a step back, it'll be many, many steps back, unfortunately.
And every now and then there's somebody comes along to like motivate us and like to lift us up a little bit. And I feel like recently that person was the software engineer at Microsoft. Ibtihal is her name. And she did a fantastic interview with Imam Omar Suleiman on Yaqeen that I really enjoyed. And so the context is all there online. You can, if you just look up Microsoft AI protest or something like that, I'm sure it'll come up. But her story is just so incredible. Like the more I looked into it, the more it inspired me to want to do more. And these people continuously come around. Every now and then there's somebody that inspires you to do something. And I sat and I thought about just how difficult it was for her to get to the position that she was in. So like to go from Morocco to her like Ivy League school, get a degree in software engineering, get a job at Microsoft, probably like the most prestigious place you could work at, you know, work her way into the system and then decide none of this is worth it if I have to continue to contribute to this genocide. It's just so inspiring. What did you think when you first saw that?
It's incredible, right? That people, exactly like you said, how hard she had to work to get to where she is. And listening to her in that interview, how she's like, it was this cognitive dissonance, like being up at night praying for our brothers and sisters and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to relieve their suffering, and then going to work at a job that was contributing to that suffering. It feels very morally, unsettling for sure. And the fact that it wasn't like a split-second decision. Right. There was a lot of, like we were talking about, that spiritual preparation. And she said how it was Ramadan right before, right? So she had a lot of that spiritual fulfillment and heightened awareness of what was happening, and asking for guidance and consulting and praying. And she said how she listened to the Barzakh series that Omar Suleiman did, and how that helped her, because that's so grounding. Like, I don't know if you watched, I watched a few episodes, and it's very, very, it helps you kind of just realize what matters and what doesn't, really, and how this is where we're headed.
Right.
So once you're grounded in that, it becomes a lot easier to take these type of stances where you look at the dunya with a different lens, right? We talk a little bit about that. Like, do I have my dunya glasses on or my akhira glasses on? If you have your dunya glasses on, doing something like that seems impossible. Like, it seems like I'm just throwing away my entire career and all my parents' hard work to help me get here and all of my hard work. But then I imagine she had her akhira glasses on, like that. This is where I'm headed, and this thing is just not worth it. So it was very, very inspiring.
The interesting thing about, like, you use the analogy of like glasses, like of having like different lenses on and off. But one of the things about it is that it's not stagnant. It's not like you can just decide to put your akhira glasses on and then just maintain that.
Exactly.
They're constantly being pulled off your face, and the dunya glasses are being put back on, right? Yeah. And you have to make a conscious effort to no, I'm taking the dunya glasses off again, right? Yeah. And that concept of spiritual preparation, that was my favorite part of the whole interview that she did with Imam Omar. And it made the sacrifice so much bigger to me too, that it wasn't just like a split-second decision that maybe she would regret or anything like that. It was something that she had thought about and deliberated. And like, even to the extent, and I highly suggest that anyone listening to this, go listen to that interview if you haven't already. Even to the extent of the words that she chose. And like sitting with a team and deciding like, if I can minimize my message into like 5 or 6 words, what do I have the opportunity to say? And they provided a bunch of examples of what that spiritual preparation looked like in terms of reviewing a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. But the thing that I thought about was Surah Al-Muzammil. And I just thought about how the Prophet ﷺ went through a similar situation of spiritual preparation. And I started sort of looking more into, and the reason Surah Al-Muzammil in particular was because of the first few ayahs of إِنَّا سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا, right? And so the translation is something along the lines of that you're going to be placed with this heavy burden, that we're going to place this heavy burden upon you. And you're going to have this big responsibility as a prophet to deliver this message to your people. And I know, like all prophets, they're going to be pushed back against, and they're going to be driven out by their town, by their city and their people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before in those first few ayahs that in order to prepare for what's coming, that heavy burden that's coming your way, what is the solution? You prepare by performing the night prayer at a time where it's just you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're building that connection. It's not like pray fajr at the masjid. It's not like, you know what I mean? It's not like a collective thing. That it's like if you're building that, like you're building a deep relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. And that spiritual preparation to me was just so beautiful, and tying those two things together.
It's very, very profound. And when you think about it, the only way to really cope with and process what's happening is through a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? I don't know how else any of this would be manageable for us in terms of seeing what's happening and processing it and coping with it. Even for the people of Gaza, like how they are people who again had a lot of this spiritual preparation to enable them. And it doesn't mean, it's something that they should just handle. No, we still actively strive for their liberation. But it's that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the connection with the Quran, how you see children walking in the streets holding the Quran and reading it like that. Like that's a different level of faith and a different level of connection. So I love that ayah, because you do really need that connection and that solitude with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that grounding, that stability. That's where we get it from.
And I mean, I'm going to ask you a question that's going to sound judgmental. I promise that's not the reason I'm asking the question. And it's general, not to you specifically. But if we're honest with ourselves, is the reason that we feel helpless or hopeless now or in despair because we've failed to prepare spiritually for this moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that could be a big part of it, for sure, that we are living here in so much comfort, and we haven't had to experience anything remotely close to that. And when you grow up in a place that's relatively comfortable, you have a lot of freedom, quote unquote. It becomes a lot harder for us to even tolerate minor inconveniences, right? We just become so frustrated with all the little things that to other people are privileges and luxuries, like having to wait in line or like traffic and things like this. These minor inconveniences become so much bigger for us that being able to tolerate bigger things becomes almost impossible. So that concept of resilience, right? How does resilience develop? It develops from being in hard conditions and being able to come out of it where you've developed new skills to be able to get through these hard things. So it definitely could be part of the spiritual, lack of spiritual preparation. And that's where, subhanAllah, when you look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends us all these things throughout the year to help us with that spiritual elevation, right? Ramadan, Fridays, Arafah, the 10 days of the Hijjah, like all these things where we're supposed to have these little stations throughout the year, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that we're not going to be able to sustain this level of heightened spirituality all throughout the year. So we get these little stations that are supposed to give you a boost, but we have to be connected to that. Like, this is why I'm doing this. It doesn't just become a cultural or a social thing that we engage in. I am doing this because I know I'm going to be tested. Like, this is a guarantee. This is an abode of trials and tribulations, and we're all going to have our own unique tests. And the more we try to prevent or avoid or run away or dismiss that fact, the more we're going to suffer when we experience these trials. So a lot of it comes down to expectation, like expecting that there will be hardships. Like that shouldn't be a shock to us. And then how you develop yourself so that when they do come, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for afiyah, we ask him for the ability to, not be tested in a way that will make us crumble, right? That we have that stamina and that resilience to be able to get through it. And I always think of the word sumud. That I think has been kind of relatively more combined with the Palestinian resilience and resistance, that there's this concept of sumud, which isn't just resilience, it's perseverance, it's stability, it's a sense of groundedness, that we are so rooted that these winds that come to try to shake us, they don't make us fall. Like we are so deeply grounded and rooted. What are we grounded and rooted in? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It's that foundation that's so unshakable. So to answer your question, yeah, I think that is part of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. And there's a saying, like they say it a lot in like basketball and boxing and stuff like that, where it's like you have to stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
you're this concept of like year round you're training, right?
True. Yeah.
Right? You're training
Yeah.
so that when you do have that moment, when that moment comes for you, when you have to step up to the plate, that you're already ready. It's not like, oh, well, give me a few days. I still need to
to
to get ready.
Time.
There's no time. And we're in a very difficult time now. Like the what's going on in Gaza is extremely difficult. What's going on with the administration in the US is very difficult.
Yeah.
What could potentially happen here in Canada is again going to be very difficult. And if people wait for it to get more difficult to get ready, we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Right? And so from today, we have to get back into that idea of spiritual preparation, and not just spiritual preparation, but just, I mean, the whole Caretakers, I guess, brand or message is to take care of yourself physically, mentally, spiritually. And I hope that people take that message and actually run with it and implement it in their lives, because we don't have the luxury of waiting until something big happens to start getting ready.
Exactly. And part of it is that, I know I talk about it a lot, but that disconnection from our day-to-day experiences, right? When we enter that state of emotional numbing or being on autopilot, it becomes a lot harder for us to the way I say is, this isn't the time to check out, it's the time to check in. What is happening around me? What is happening inside of me? Being emotionally sensitive to what is going on, and tuning into your own emotional world, because again, not that our emotions should be driving us, like they should never be in the driver's seat, but they are very important. And the more we actually tune into what am I feeling, right? And we can talk about that, how to get out of that numb state. But that's part of it, that emotional check-in that you go throughout your day. When you go through a hard experience, what a lot of people do is they numb it out, right? They go home and they watch TV, or they do other things that kind of get their mind off of it. Like, I just don't want to think about it. And I think that's where we fall into danger as a society, when we're not allowing ourselves to sit with discomfort. Like, it's very, very hard for us to just sit there and reflect about our day or a hard experience, learn from it and grow from it, and think, how did I contribute to this? And what could I do better? That's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. When you ask them to do it, they're like, this is so hard. I'd rather just check out for a few hours, go to sleep, wake up the next day, start over. That's not how it works. These things accumulate inside of us. And the more disconnected we are, the less able we are to actually develop and grow. So that's where I think a lot of that spiritual preparation involves a lot of being emotionally connected to our experiences, to each other, like even just sitting with someone and having a conversation, being fully engaged in that and not somewhere else, right? In our minds, right? Just everything that we're doing, it almost becomes like it's just going through the motions. And I think that's where we sometimes fall into that. If a trial hits me, I don't even know what to do with it, because the minor things in my life, I haven't taken the time to process them or reflect on them properly.
Part of it, honestly, I feel like, at least for me, I can talk about myself, and maybe you can tell me if you've heard similar stories from people, but I feel like sometimes I'm so busy and going from thing to thing that I don't have time alone to just process thoughts and emotions. Do you think that's common?
Yes, very common. That's actually the number one excuse. Like, not, I don't mean to call it an excuse, but the number one reason that people don't do this process of reflection or emotional connectedness every day. So the way I look at it is, this is one of those things that it doesn't have to take hours. It's honestly just a 5-minute check-in every day. The way I recommend it to people is tack it onto your prayers, your 5 daily prayers. Just take a minute or two after your prayer and just think, what's going on inside of me? What emotions, what thoughts am I having? You get better at it, and it becomes a lot more natural of a process, where you don't have to carve out too much time out of your day to do it. You just become a lot more emotionally aware of what's going on inside of you, and you'll find your life becomes so much richer. Like, even when you're sitting with your family, or with your loved ones, or with your friends, or even when you're in solitude with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have a much deeper experience versus it just being like a very superficial type of thing, which helps us a lot in our prayers to establish that hudur, like that khushu'ah that we're supposed to have. So it's something that actually doesn't need to take a lot of time. We just have to prioritize it. And when you think about it, would I rather spend a little bit of time up front to understand myself and what's going on inside of me, rather than these emotions accumulating, and then they will eventually come out. And it usually comes out in ways that aren't very healthy. We might snap at someone. It usually just takes one little thing, we snap, or we respond in a way that later on we're like, that was so like disproportionate to what was happening. Like, why did I fly off the handle like that? Or we just feel so exhausted and weighed down. It's because you have like all emotions are pretty much energy. All this energy inside of you that you haven't really tapped into or paid attention to. And like we said, emotions are data. Like it's telling you, hey, there's something in here that you have to look into. So it may take a little bit of time up front, but it'll save you a lot of time later on, if you know what I mean. Like it'll actually help free up some of that capacity inside of you to do other things instead of all this energy being inside of you. It's kind of like a child that's trying to get your attention and you're ignoring them. They're just going to get louder and they're going to start, jumping on you to get your attention. So emotions are the same. They start off quiet. We keep ignoring them. We don't really check in. They get louder and louder, and they sometimes manifest in physical symptoms, migraines, tension, GI issues, sleeplessness. So try and, look at them from the source instead of waiting for them to get so much worse. Right. So just those few minutes a day really doesn't take much.
Okay. And I want to talk to you about how do we get out of it? So what are some ways that you think we can get out of this emotional numbness that we're feeling?
Yeah. So, and this is really important. So thank you for asking. I think like I mentioned throughout, one of the first steps is just be aware. So look at your day, look at your life. Do you, if I were to ask you, what did you do 2 days ago? Would you be able to answer that?
I asked you what day of the week it was. That's
I'll put you on the spot.
Friday.
It was Friday.
It's Jum'ah. It's easy.
Okay.
Jum'ah's an easier day.
That's
if you told me like a Tuesday, it's harder.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that we, sometimes people think, well, it's so hard to be engaged. And this isn't that you have to be on all the time and fully 100% engaged. That's not possible. Our brain has all kinds of input coming through, right? And it filters out what's important and what isn't. So even wherever you are, it's very hard to stay 100% engaged. That's normal. But it's that we have become kind of in more of an autopilot state, which is some parts of our day, it's good for them to be on autopilot because then it frees up your brain for other things. Like, for example, your drive to work every day. If it's the same route you take, you don't have to think too much about what, unless you're going like a different route, like you have to take a detour, then you really have to be thinking about where you're going. But so some parts of our day, it's good, like our habits, like getting up, brushing our teeth, like doing our morning Quran, our words, our walks, whatever it is you do, having that on autopilot is sometimes a good thing because then you don't have to think too much. You can spend all that mental energy elsewhere in your day. But if your entire day is autopilot where you're just not really connected to what you're doing, and we all fall into this to some extent, that's where it gets hard because, again, your emotions are just, the valve is turned off. And when you ask people, have you felt joy recently? They say no. Mm-hmm. I've done things that usually like spark joy. I've done the things that I used to enjoy doing, but I don't feel anything when I do them. I don't even feel anything around my family or the people that I love. And that's where it just becomes a lot harder to function and cope in our lives, right? And then especially when it comes to anything where we have to advocate in the movement and everything else that we're trying to do for our brothers and sisters, it's so much harder to get motivated, right? Because you're waiting for that feeling of this is so wrong, what's happening, so I'm going to get up and do something. That's not there, the emotion. Therefore, our advocacy starts to suffer as a result. So the number one thing is to just be aware of it. Am I in this autopilot, numbed state where I just feel flat? What do I do during my day? Do I spend a lot of time distracting myself? Am I doom scrolling all the time? Am I watching so much of the news that's embedded in between? And like when you're on social media, it's so unsettling and fragmented where you'll like watch a video of someone getting burnt in a tent and then the next video someone's cooking, showing their recipe. And that's so like psychologically, like it really, really does something to you, right? And your brain's like, what's going on here? It's very unsettling. So just asking yourself, am I distracted most of the day? Am I just numbing out? Am I just putting on one episode after the other because I don't know how else to cope with what's going on? And then the third thing is that emotional check-in, like having that 5 to 10 minutes of reflection time, putting away your phone. A lot of people do this before they sleep, which I think is a good time because you can process your whole day. And I usually recommend going through your day like a story. Like I woke up and then I went to work and then I did this and I did that. and trying to figure out how you were kind of feeling throughout those different parts of your day. It's a really, I say it's like one of the biggest like life improvement hacks, because you can actually go back in your day and process it appropriately. And then you actually learn like, oh, I wonder why I did that. Why did I say that? Why did I feel that way after I walked away from this person or whatnot? So it's actually a very, very healthy exercise to do. And then trying to just ground yourself in your day-to-day life. Like when you're doing something, instead of like, let's say when people are eating and they have their phones and they're watching, like just put it away and actually just focus on what you're doing. Like you're eating, you're nourishing your body, focus on the flavor of what you're eating. Focus on the actual meal time, like with your family. Just really just that mindfulness. Like when I'm going about my day, I'm actually connected to what I'm doing. And then just being aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're spending your time, until you're kind of able to eventually get out of it. And then the last thing is slowly like exposing yourself to emotional stimuli. So go back to watching the news, but in small digestible ways. So instead of watching it for an hour, or every time you have a free moment in your day, you take out your phone and start looking at the news, thinking to yourself, okay, what is the purpose of me watching the news right now? It's just going to make it hard for me to function after. So let me pick a time of day where I can actually sit there and watch it and feel how I feel as a result. Because sometimes what happens is we're watching it and then we're with people. So then we have to put away our phone and compartmentalize, put it away.
Right.
And then you don't even have the chance to feel how you felt about it. You distracted yourself immediately after watching something horrific happening. So we have to just get wise about when we're engaging with the news. Being informed is very important, but also being aware of how it's impacting you. Like too much of something is also, it's not going to help. Like I always tell myself, if I'm feeling so weighed down by what I'm seeing all day to the point where I can't do anything purposeful, then is that really a good consumption of the news, versus watching it in more purposeful, intentional ways throughout my day where I can actually sit and feel how I feel about it and process it? That's probably going to help me a lot more to function and to do what I need to do for my brothers and sisters. So that's it's a process. It is a process. Like it's not something we can just get over. You switch off from a numb state to a very emotionally.
We didn't become numb overnight, right? So you're not going to be back to normal overnight either.
And as you're doing it, remind yourself that I'm doing this as a means of actually reintegrating and re-engaging back in order to help my brothers and sisters. Like that motivation that I'm doing this so that I can be more useful in this situation, versus just consuming it all day long, getting worn down. What that's doing to my brain, shutting off the emotional expression altogether, that's not helpful.
Right. I want to jump topics a little bit, but it's still kind of connected.
Sure.
As we were talking earlier about range of emotions, I thought about a group of people. I don't know if it sounds a bit weird to say it that way. I thought about a group that has a very wide range of emotions. It's our kids. They have like their range of emotions is like this, whereas ours is probably like this.
Yes.
And they're also able to jump from emotions way faster than we are.
Yeah.
What have you been thinking about these days in terms of parenting and?
There's so much. Do you have a few hours?
Yeah.
Exactly what you said. So our children are born with the ability to experience all emotions without the coping tools to manage them, right? So they're at a disadvantage almost. Like I had to remind myself of this, especially when my kids were toddlers and there were all these outbursts all the time, right? And you just have to remember that their emotions are bigger than their bodies sometimes. Like I had to visualize whenever they'd have a meltdown or an outburst that their emotions are literally bigger than their body. They're coming out of their body, coming to me. And I have to be that safe container for those emotions, as hard as it is and as frustrating as it is as a parent to witness that. But I had to look at them as saying, Mama, I need help. Like I have all these emotions and I don't know what to do with them. And when you think about how little time they've actually been on this earth for, like, whether they're 3 or 7 or 10 even, like they're still figuring out how do I fit into this world? How does this world function? And they learn a lot of the emotional regulation skills from us as their parents, which puts a lot of pressure on us, right? You have to kind of model to them healthy ways of emotional regulation, which is really hard as a parent when your kids are dysregulated to stay regulated enough to help them. So it's just been, and even over the last year and a half, like we've all been as parents really struggling emotionally, and our kids pick up on that for sure. So over the last year and a half, I felt like I've just had to do a lot of sitting and chatting with my kids, like, I know I haven't been as you know, cheerful as usual, and as my ability to play with you all the time, because I'm struggling with a lot of these difficult emotions, right? So just being honest with them and showing them that it's okay for us to feel these really hard emotions, and there's actually a really healthy way of coping with them. So I feel like it is a lot of pressure to model those healthy things, but it's also a huge advantage that we are the first people our children learn from. Like, we are their first teachers. And we have the ability to, over time, teach them how to have good relationships, how to communicate, how to resolve conflict, and regulate those emotions. So that's kind of been on my mind lately.
Okay, I'll give you maybe I'll give you a scenario that'll
Sure,
help. So,
sure. I love scenarios.
and not this has happened to me.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, asking for a friend.
Yeah.
You're in a public place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your kid is just having the tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like the worst tantrum ever. and
Yeah.
and what do you do? Like, what's the recommended approach?
Yeah. Definitely, we join the club. That's definitely happened a lot. So I'll tell you a little story about something that happened with one of my kids. And the only reason I'm sharing it, I don't usually share stories of my kids' struggles, but my daughter was 3 at the time, kind of probably what you're referring to. So it was right after COVID. And so keeping in mind, my kids had been home for like 2 years, and my husband and I decided to take our kids on a trip. I don't know why, but we went through some of 2 of the busiest airports. And I remember my daughter was 3 at the time. So she had spent the last 2 years like in my lap at home, quiet environment. There's nobody else around. We weren't allowed to see anybody. And then we suddenly, they open up like the restrictions. So we decided to go on a trip. And she's a highly sensitive individual. So she picks up a lot from her environment in terms of, and being in an airport, everybody would kind of feels overstimulated, all the noise, and people
adults' behavior goes
right?
down
Oh gosh.
in an airport.
And it was a really early morning flight for whatever reason. We decided to take that. And we had to wake our kids up. So they were sleep deprived, they were tired, they were overstimulated, overwhelmed, a lot of noise. It was a meltdown waiting to happen. I knew it was going to happen at some point, and it happened right at the security checkout where her backpack was the only one that needed to get checked. And it was like this pink sparkly unicorn backpack, and the officer's like, "We have to check this." I was like, "Oh no." And I looked at her, and she saw that he took her backpack and was taking everything out of it to search it. And it was like this like big officer with like gloves, and he's taking out all these little knickknacks that she had in there, random things. And I just looked at her and I looked at my husband. I'm like, "It's gonna happen right now." And she was beside herself, dropped to the floor, kicking and screaming. And when I looked around, I was like the only visible Muslim in this airport from where I could stand, what I could see. And those moments where you feel like time just stands still.
Right.
And I felt like we were a sight to be seen. So I've definitely been there. And I share this story with a lot of the parents I work with, because I tell them all of us go through these moments where we're in a very inconvenient situation and our kids drop to the ground. So my husband tried to pick her up and he couldn't. And I'm like, just put her down. And so him and my son kind of stood to the side trying to pretend they don't know us probably. And so I looked at my daughter. I looked at this little 3-year-old tiny human being who has spent the last 2 years at home and now is in this really busy environment. And I'm like, it makes sense. Like, I don't blame her for feeling this way. And they took her only comfort thing was her backpack. Like, she was holding onto it the whole time, and the officer took it. And then, so I thought to myself, okay, everyone's looking at us. That's fine. Just try to not think about that. And I thought, what is my objective here? What do I want? So, naturally it's for the meltdown to end and for us to make it to our flight on time. But then I looked at her and I'm like, she's feeling scared and she's feeling like something of hers was taken from her. She's feeling overwhelmed and overstimulated. She's tired, and all she needs is to feel safe. She needs safety. So I went and I just sat on the ground with her, just cross-legged, just sat beside her. And I said, "Mama, I'm right here if you need a hug." Because at that point, the language centers in their brains are offline. Like, you can't rationalize.
Yeah, you can't.
There was no point in me sitting there saying, "Mama, you're going to get your backpack back. Like, just wait a few moments. Everything's going to be okay." She was not in any state to hear what I was saying. So I just sat there with her. And it's this process called co-regulation, where I'm basically not absorbing her chaos. I'm trying to get her to absorb my calm. I wasn't feeling so calm inside, but I had to kind of show her that I can stay regulated, that I'm not scared of her emotions. Because what happens is when we become frustrated, our kids pick up on that really, really quickly. And then it makes them just so much more scared that even this adult that's supposed to be in control here, now they're feeling frustrated, which means this emotion really is scary. But when they see that you are kind of that sturdy leader, you are in control of your emotions, their emotions don't scare you. You can contain them. She looked at me and she just didn't say anything. She kept crying. And then I told her, do you want to come sit in my lap? And then she came and she crawled and sat in my lap. And I just felt like that relief.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you can kind of tell when you're over the really big part of it, so of the meltdown. And she just sat in my lap and I just hugged her. And then a lady came to me and she, as I was sitting there on the ground, and she's like, I've raised 4 kids. And she's like, you should have just gotten up and walked away. She would have followed you. And I told her, oh, thank you. But she was feeling really unsafe. And me walking her away would have just made her feel even more unsafe.
Mhm.
And even if she did get up and walk after me, she would have continued that meltdown later on. Like even if
Right.
she stopped, that I say the only way to get through a meltdown is through. We just
Mm.
have to ride the wave. That's a huge buildup of emotion that had to come out. So when your children are experiencing this huge burst of emotion, don't rush them. I know we want it to stop so much, but instead of rushing them out of it, the best way through is through letting them feel safe. Pretty much my calm nervous system gets transferred onto her. She sees that I'm not scared of her emotions. I just held her. She felt safe. She got her backpack back. It was the Play-Doh. Don't take
Yeah,
Play-Doh.
don't take
The
Play-Doh on a
officer
plane.
was like, do you want this? I'm like, no, get rid of it.
At
I
that point, you're like,
don't ever
"You
want to see
burn
it
I
again.
don't care."
Yeah, I'm just like, and she was perfectly fine the rest of the time. She went and she took a really long nap on the plane, which was glorious. So when we think about what do I want the objective to be here when my child is having a meltdown in a public place, we start to feel embarrassed. We just want it to end. But just think, my child, the number one thing they need right now is safety and connection. And what do we usually do? We bribe, we threaten, we say, if you don't get up, I'm going to leave you, which just makes them feel even more unsafe. And that meltdown's going to eventually erupt later on. So I always say just infuse as much safety and connection and letting them know that you can handle them. And through that process of co-regulation, you're actually teaching them over many repeated times how to do that for themselves. But it takes a lot of repeated instances of you being calm and regulated to help them see that they can go from up here to down here in terms of their emotional reactivity. And then you're pretty much building up their brain network to be able to do that for themselves. So I always say safety, connection, letting them see that you're not afraid of it. Don't try not to show how frustrated you are, because that'll just make it worse. And just hold them and lessen the amount of words you use during that time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much. That was helpful advice.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk for 3 hours about parenting
so
and
much.
tips and stuff like that. We might have to do it another day,
Inshallah.
just for time. But jazakallah khair. I hope that we are able to sort of help each other get out of this feeling of emotional numbness and desensitization. And I think there's individual work to be done and collective work to be done.
Yeah.
And I just want to plug as well your Instagram page, because I think that you share a lot of very useful stuff. So it's at Mother Care Journey, all I guess one word with the way it works on Instagram. And a lot of useful stuff that you share. So keep sharing it. We are watching it and find it very helpful.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.